We have Conrad Saldanha, Managing Director, Portfolio Manager at Neuberger Berman. He's with us here in our studios. Welcome to the studio. Welcome to Mumbai.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Same
Always
here.
better than sort of chatting via link.
Doing Zoom.
How are things looking, Conrad? We're in a pretty big week with the elections concluding, the long elections concluding and getting to the end of it. Exit polls on Saturday. Let's just start with politics as a quick question. Market seems to be pretty confident about continuity in that sense.
Yeah, coming from the US, talking about politics is a dangerous subject. So I'll just put that out there. Obviously, the market's looking for continuity, right? And what you've seen in terms of infrastructure reforms, they've executed. We could, that's undebatable. So obviously, there's a fair bit now getting priced into it. And when I was here in February, I think we were talking about numbers closer to 400. We'll see what the reality is. But obviously, at the end of the day, they cross the finish line. And they stay in power. You see the continuity of the progress that's already been made. So I think that's the key to it, and taking out the sentiment. Obviously, you've seen the market start to move up a little bit. It's been a little volatile prior to that, but we're pricing in a little bit into the final stretch here.
There's been just one thing about it, foreigners selling, and they've been in India in local currency terms. They've sold about 1.2 lakh crores worth of stocks. In 24, there were sellers in 23, 22, 21. It's not stopped the market from doing well. But do you think it's got anything to do with getting the election outcome passed and then they make they come back in any significant way, or this is more emerging market selling related?
So it's emerging market related, Prashant. To be fair, the locals have sucked in, right? When you think of that 2 billion coming through SIPs, that's filled in more and more, right? Yeah. So it's an embarrassment of riches, right, with the cash flow that's coming into the market. I think for the foreigners, the structural issue has been outflows out of EM as an asset class. And a part of it was China, the underperformance that dragged the asset class down. Nearer term, tactically, that seems to be changing. But I think there should be some reversion to that. Right. But the few funds have been invested in India for a long period of time remain overweight in India, and they see the structural case for it.
And so it's also been large money coming in from domestic institutions, right? I mean, this month almost like this huge amount has come in. So clearly, people are pricing in a positive opening. This is a market that has been up and away, right? And large money coming in from domestic investors. Whatever be the outcome of the elections, do you reckon that barring the fact that if there is a large upset, of course, things could turn differently, but do you reckon that this is an uptrending market that one should still participate in?
Tough call, Sonia. I think for us, I would say nearer term valuations might be the struggle. Fundamentals look good, they're executing, but it's also patchy, right? So I'll just highlight that. Your manufacturing, infrastructure, even defense-related names, you're seeing the numbers come through, right? But on the flip side, I would say for consumption broadly, it's been a soft patch, right? IT, after listening to NVIDIA, that's a massive strategic shift, that's inflection that's happening at almost once in a decade. You see that, so that needs to adjust itself. So there are pockets of it, and when I look at the bank's numbers are somewhat mixed. So it's not all smooth sailing when I look at it fundamentally. So everything gapping up and moving up. I think a rising tide is definitely in play here. So I would just be a little bit more discriminatory in terms of what I buy and be very selective on companies that are executing, they're growing in terms of their volumes, right? Yeah. Price, hopefully not too much of a negative, but that's where I would be deploying capital. But, just moving away from a broader story.
All right, Conrad, good to meet you, first of all, in person. And thanks a lot for coming down to our studio. Let's get a couple of names out of the way. The last time you were down, we spoke about, I think, Jyoti CNC ASK Auto. We, in fact, interviewed the management a few days ago. And a few other notable names as well that y'all got into. CMS, I think, was the other one. Give us a list of a couple of stocks that y'all have recently got into, which has a good runway.
I think for the names you mentioned, we're still very positive on them. I think there's a long runway. It's much more structural. If you talk about the EMS space, we have owned Kaynes for a long period of time. We probably had much more exposure broadly, but I think the two folks who are executing, one is Dixon's, right? They're kind of the gold standard of the listed space in terms of just getting those volumes out there. If I can go back 15, 20 years, whether it was Nokia, Ericsson, they've really come along. It doesn't matter which the client is, right? They've really adjusted themselves. Kaynes is the other one that I think is executing, going from more PCB, box build, OSAT, ODM manufacturing. So I feel good about that business structurally longer term. The other ASK still, the numbers post the IPO, there was a soft patch in terms of the quarter. Now you're seeing them deliver coming through, and so whether it's a 38% growth in revenues is a very strong number from the team there, Mr. Rathi in particular. If I move on to potentially Venus Pipes. Again,
that's something that you'll have liked for a long time.
For a little while, and like I mentioned the last time, Nigel, we don't turn over our portfolio that much, and when you're buying the smaller names, you're genuinely believing in the compounding of this business over the long period of time. But Venus Pipes would be one that I again see, whether it's seamless, it's welded pipes, they're moving more into fittings. Again, volume growth of 40%.
Indeed.
For EMS companies like Dixon and Kaynes, Conrad, what are valuations at now? And for people looking to get fresh exposure, does it make sense? I mean, if you already own it, great, you're making money.
Yeah, Prashant, your point is fair. It's a tough one. Dixon's, you had those opportunities where the sell-off, right? And you get a 15-20% correction. Now, putting new money, if you have a longer-term view of 2 to 3 years, they're going to compound, and the order flow coming through, they start to do more in terms of CPU, GPUs coming out. It's going to really inflect.
No, we had the management with us a few weeks ago. They said they did about 18,000 crores in revenues in 24, and they told us that for 25, then that number would be north of 32,000 crores. So that's a big inflection.
Big inflection already. Yeah.
But margins, of course, are for this kind of a business are small. But what would you be willing to pay for? And would you look at cheaper names, maybe Amber? I don't know. I mean, would you go down that road?
Prashant, I would put it that in terms of execution, having gone through this and looked at the U.S. names, Taiwanese names, we also invest in. Dixon's has delivered. Now, the business model, to your point, is that margins are lower, but their turns are as good as anybody. And so you look at return on capital is really solid. Kaynes has higher margins than them. They're about, EBITDA margins are probably in that 14.5% to 15% range, and still good ROC. So that's another one. I would say, depending on growth. Now, I do believe these businesses can grow at 30% or so. I'm not going to say 50, 70% is sustainable when you look at a 5-year ramp. So if you're paying, on a PE multiple in that range, probably makes more sense. You get those opportunities. Dixon's has never been a cheap stock. You get disruption from one customer to the next. The market gets myopic about a quarterly number, and that's your opportunity to buy it.
And look at the way the stock has moved, right? 150% in the last 12 months. Conrad, the last time we spoke to you, you said that if you get an opportunity, you will buy into private sector banks. But you were a bit skeptical about the way the HDFC Bank had done communication with their investors, etc. All of this happened, a few months ago. But at this point in time, there's a lot of buying seen by domestic investors in HDFC Bank. What do you do now?
I think if you have a longer-term view, HDFC Bank is still a franchise. As I mentioned the last time, and you rightly said that, Sonia, is that one was communications. The other thing is, I think for all of us, we have to be practical. These are two big businesses coming together, right? There's a piece of the book that needs to be recycled, figuring out deposits and restarting the engine. So I think and we have to keep an eye on management changes, right? And any exits there, that matters. This is a people business, right? The business, I think, is solid longer term. I would say, and its valuations, when you think of it, this was a business that used to trade at 4 times book. The other one was Kotak, right? Was on the private sector, was at massive premiums. And now they're trading at the low end, and the gap between PSU banks has shrunk massively, right?
So what does your order of preference look like in the banking space now?
So, I would say we're still more exposed to the private sector. Okay. The name that we're very excited longer term about is Chola. Again, fantastic collections. It's about collections that matter. I'm a little more cautious when I think of the low end of the spectrum in India. When I think of lower incomes, people are getting marginalized and squeezed because of inflation. So you're starting to see that manifest itself. Microfinance, I think you're going to see those uptick. I'm seeing that right now in Indonesia. And it seems like a very similar playbook that's evolving here.
Sorry, uptick in?
and non-performing loans, ability to pay, people getting squeezed. So I think that's something I would just be a little bit more cautious about. I would say consumption at the low end, does that migrate to the mid-end consumer if it persists for a long period of time? It cannot be that K-curve that we talk about. So just to balance out the maybe optimism that maybe there are green shoots we're talking about when you speak to the FMCG companies, right? Dabur, Levis are talking about something. We'll have to see that. Is that a continuation of that? Is that just prior to the election? Is that being helped? Urban migration. So there are a lot of nice stories around that. We'll have to just see a continuation of that, of those green shoots.
Well, that's right. Chola, as we discussed last time as well, may not be cheap, but plenty of room to grow and compound from here on. Well, Conrad, we appreciate you coming down to our studio, discussing the markets as well as all those stocks. Wishing you well, and we look forward to chat up with you post the election.
Thanks,
Thanks, Prashant. Cheers.